There's a kind of ghost that doesn't know it's dead yet. It just walks the earth, hollowed out, waiting for the wind to finally have the good sense to blow it away. That was Silas Boone. Out in Dry Hollow, a town that God forgot to finish, Silas was less a person and more a piece of scenery. A stray dog you kick without thinking, a tumbleweed you watch roll by. He was 19, but his eyes were ancient, full of dust and hunger. He slept under a busted wagon axle and ate pine bark to quiet the gnawing in his gut. The townfolk had stories for him. The preacher, a man named Thorne with a Bible in one hand and a scowl for the whole world, said Silas was born of sin. The miners, with knuckles like rocks and hearts to match, just called him Ghost Boy and spat when he walked past. He'd ask for work, his voice barely a whisper, and they'd laugh. Lazy, worthless, a bad omen. He was a rumor wearing a dead man's coat, a boy with no past and a future that looked like a shallow grave. He didn't belong to the world, and the world was fine with that. One evening, when the sun was bleeding all over the horizon, something changed. A man walked down the center of Main Street like he owned it, which was a good way to get killed in Dry Hollow. He was old, his face a roadmap of 100 hard winters, his hair in 2 long silver braids. An elder from the Red Elk tribe. The town froze. Doors slammed shut. Mothers snatched their kids from the street. This wasn't supposed to happen. The tribe kept to the woods and the town kept to its dirt. It was a rule written in blood and bad memories. But here he was, walking straight and tall, like he didn't hear the silence screaming at him. 2 miners, Jed and Corbin, peeled themselves off the saloon porch. They were drunk on cheap whiskey and the simple pleasure of being cruel. They swaggered out to meet the elder, their shadows stretching long and ugly in the dying light. Silas watched from the edge of town, hidden near the dry riverbed. He should have looked away. He should have faded back into the landscape like he always did. But he didn't. Jed shoved the old man, hard. The elder stumbled but didn't fall. Corbin smashed a bottle against his ribs, the glass making a sick, wet crunch. They laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. They called him names Silas had heard before, names that tasted like poison. The elder didn't fight back. He just started to fall, slow and deliberate, like he was tired of standing in a world this ugly. And that's when Silas moved. He didn't know why. It wasn't a choice. It was like a string inside him, one he didn't even know he had, was pulled taut. He walked out from the shadows, out into the open, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The miners saw him and laughed even harder. The town ghost coming to the rescue. The thrill was gone for them. There's no fun in breaking something that's already broken. They gave the elder one last kick and swaggered back to the saloon, their duty to hate fulfilled for the day. Silas knelt by the old man. The elder's breath was a ragged whisper, but his eyes were clear and deep, dark as a forest at midnight. They looked right through Silas, seeing something more than the dirt and the hunger. In that moment, a new sound cut through the air, a sharp, deadly whistle. Silas didn't have time to think. He just reacted. An instinct from a life he never lived took over. He threw his body over the elder, a shield of skin and bone. The arrow hit him with the sound of an axe splitting wet wood. It punched into his side just below the ribs, and the world went white. Pain was a hot, screaming thing, but the silence that came after was worse. It was the sound of the world ending, one breath at a time. He saw the elder's face above him, his mouth moving, but the words were stolen by the wind. Then everything went dark. He woke up smelling hay and fear. He was in the preacher's barn, tucked away behind old crates, a moth-eaten quilt thrown over him. The arrow was still in him, a brutal spike of wood and stone, wrapped in linen strips that smelled of herbs. The elder sat beside him, still as a statue, watching a flickering lantern cast dancing devils on the walls. "You bleed quiet," the elder said. His voice was like stones rolling in a river. Silas tried to talk, but his throat was full of sand and fire. "You did not speak to save me," the elder continued. "Why speak now?" Pain flared up Silas's side, hot and sharp, and he winced. "They will come looking for you," the elder said, his eyes on the barn door. "Men do not like it when their shame is given a face." Silas closed his eyes, the world spinning. What had he done? He'd traded his invisible misery for a very real, very sharp death. I have no tribe, the elder said softly, almost to himself. No sons, no place left but the memory of one. Still, you bled for me, so I owe you a debt. A tear slid down Silas's cheek. It wasn't from the pain. It was from the shock of being owed anything at all. In his entire life, the world had only ever taken from him. That night, the wind howled like a banshee, and it brought the sounds of the town with it. Drunken laughter, angry shouts, a voice, Jed's maybe, slurring something about traitor trash. Then a heavy thump against the barn door. Footsteps, heavy and clumsy. They knew he was here. The elder rose to his feet, his movements slow and certain. They know you lived, he whispered. Before Silas could even try to sit up, he saw it. An orange tongue of fire licking its way under the door. Then another. Smoke began to pour into the barn, thick and choking, smelling of hatred. The laughter outside got louder. They weren't just coming to finish the job. They were going to burn him alive, like a piece of garbage. Pain screamed through him as the elder hauled him to his feet. They stumbled out the back of the barn, into the freezing night air, just as the roof began to groan. The whole sky was lit up by the fire, a giant, angry eye staring down at them. They made it to the fields, the stars spinning wildly above. Silas collapsed by an old cottonwood, his breath coming in ragged, bloody gasps. I'm gonna die here, he rasped, the smoke and the pain wringing the life out of him. The elder shook his head, his silver braids catching the firelight. No, I know a place. Why? Silas coughed, tasting blood. Why are you helping me? The old man looked down at him, and for the first time, Silas saw something in his eyes besides ancient sadness. It was a flicker of something else, something that looked a lot like purpose. Because you didn't ask why you should help me, he said. The journey was a blur of agony. The elder half carried, half dragged him through brush and up dry stream beds, following paths that weren't on any map. He whispered to the trees in a language that sounded like the wind itself, and maybe, just maybe, the trees whispered back. Finally, they reached it. A curtain of vines and trickling water hid the entrance to a cave. It felt ancient, hidden, safe. Inside, a small fire was already burning, the smoke snaking up through a crack in the ceiling. The walls were covered in carvings, elk and suns and rivers and men with eyes wide with wonder. Silas collapsed, clutching his side. The linen was soaked through with fresh blood. The elder worked fast, his hands surprisingly steady. He cleaned the wound, applied a dark, earthy salve that both burned and soothed, and wrapped it with fresh strips of cloth he pulled from a leather pouch. You're not the first to be hurt for kindness, he said, his voice a low hum, but you might be the youngest to bleed for a stranger. Silas just breathed, in and out. The pain was a living thing, but in the humming quiet of the cave, it seemed less important. Sleep, the elder said. I don't know how, Silas whispered, the truth of it raw and honest. He hadn't really slept in years. He'd only passed out from exhaustion, always with one ear open for trouble. The elder didn't answer. He simply placed a small, perfect red hawk feather beside Silas's hand. Then he sat back, closed his eyes, and began to sing. A low, long song with no words Silas could understand, but a melody that spoke of mountains and eagles and time itself. Staring at that feather, something inside Silas that had been clenched tight for 19 years finally began to let go. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since he was a child, he slept without fear. He slept like he was safe. But something was wrong. The arrow that hit him. He remembered the whistle it made. It wasn't the clumsy twang of a hunter's bow. It was sharp, professional, and the fletching he'd glimpsed. It wasn't the gray goose feathers that townsfolk used. It was black, sleek and black, and it hadn't been aimed at him. It had been aimed directly at the elder's heart. When Silas woke, the world was painted in shades of blue and gray. The fire was low, the shadows deep. The pain in his side was a dull, hot throb, a constant reminder of his stupidity. He turned his head, and the elder was there, sitting in the exact same spot, eyes closed. He looked like he'd been carved from the mountain itself. You're awake, the elder said without opening his eyes. I thought the dream might keep you. Silas tried to sit up, and a fresh wave of agony made him gasp. Rest, the elder commanded, his voice a little softer this time. The wound is not yet closed. Silas slumped back against the cave wall. Why did they shoot at you? He asked, his voice hoarse. Because I am not welcome, the elder replied, his eyes still shut. Because I do not belong where fences grow and coins sing. But more than that, because fear makes men cowards when they think no one is watching. It made sense, but it didn't feel like the whole truth. Cowards kick and punch. They throw bottles. They don't fire perfectly aimed arrows from the shadows. That was something else. That was an execution. He looked at the red feather still lying beside his hand. He hadn't touched it. It felt too clean for him. You have a name? He asked. The elder finally opened his eyes. In the dim light, they shone like polished obsidian. I was once called Eluset. It means he who remembers. Few call me anything now. Silas, he offered. My name, if it matters. Eluset studied him, a long, unblinking gaze. Names matter more when you give them than when they are taken. Silas. It fits a boy who bleeds for strangers. A strange choice of words. Not a boy who helps strangers, but one who bleeds for them. The silence settled between them again. Comfortable. Silas looked at the carvings on the wall. A running horse. A man with his arms stretched to the sky. They felt live. This place is not mine, Eluset said, following his gaze. It belongs to those who came before. My people used to heal here, long before the fences and the fires. He paused. I was not in your town by accident, Silas. A cold knot formed in Silas's stomach. I was looking for something, Eluset continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Or someone. He reached into the leather pouch at his belt and pulled something out. It was a small, crudely carved wooden bird. He held it out on his palm. Silas's breath caught in his throat. His blood went ice cold. He reached into the tattered lining of his own coat, his fingers trembling, and pulled out the one thing he owned in the entire world. The one thing he'd had for as long as he could remember, a fuzzy memory of a woman's hand pressing it into his. It was an identical wooden bird. Where? Silas couldn't finish the sentence. The world was tilting on its axis. It was your mother's, Eluset said, his voice heavy with a story Silas could feel in his bones. Her name was Layli. She was of my people, and I have been searching for her son for a very long time. The cave, which had felt like a sanctuary moments before, suddenly felt like a trap. The air grew thick, heavy with unspoken history. Silas stared at the two birds, mirror images of each other, and felt the last 19 years of his life crumble into dust. He wasn't just Silas Boone, the ghost boy. He was someone else, someone people looked for, and someone maybe that people hunted. My mother, Silas said the word, and it felt foreign, like a language he'd never spoken. Where is she? Eluset's face was a mask of ancient grief. She is with the ancestors, boy. She and your father. They were killed many years ago. Killed. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp as a knife. All his life, Silas had assumed he was abandoned, dropped off and forgotten. The truth was so much worse. Your mother broke tradition, Eluset explained, his voice low and steady, trying to anchor Silas in the storm that was breaking inside him. She fell in love with a white man, a trapper. They ran away together. When you were born, she sent word. She wanted to bring you back, to have you raised among her people. But before she could, they were found. Found by who? Silas demanded, the pain in his side forgotten, replaced by a burning rage. We never knew for certain. The bodies were discovered weeks later. But you were gone. We thought you had been killed with them. Eluset looked at Silas, his eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed bottomless. Until I heard whispers of a ghost boy in Dry Hollow, an orphan with no past, who arrived the same season your parents disappeared. A boy left on the steps of the church. The church. Preacher Thorne. The preacher? Silas's mind reeled. He knew. He was entrusted to watch over you, Elisei confirmed. A friend of your father's begged him to keep you safe, to keep your identity a secret until it was safe for our people to come for you. Thorn was paid well for his silence. It all clicked into place, a horrifying mosaic of cruelty. The constant scorn, the names, the way Thorn looked at him, not with pity, but with a deep, abiding contempt. He wasn't just a heartless man of God. He was a jailer. He had kept Silas small, broken, and invisible on purpose. He'd buried Silas's identity under years of shame and neglect. Why? To protect him? No, that didn't feel right. The preacher's cruelty felt personal. It felt like he was punishing Silas for simply existing. A new terrifying thought bloomed in the darkness. The attack in the street. The arrow. The attack on you, Silas whispered. It wasn't random, was it? They knew you were there for me. Elisette simply nodded. Thorn grew greedy. The silence he was paid for became a weapon. He must have learned you were more than just an orphan, that you were a bridge between two worlds, a bridge he wanted to burn. The world outside the cave was no longer just indifferent. It was actively hostile. Silas wasn't just a target of random cruelty anymore. He was the center of a conspiracy, the living ghost of a secret someone had killed to keep buried. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the entrance of the cave. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the morning light. He was younger than Elisette, built like a mountain wolf, lean and powerful. His face was all sharp angles and suspicion, his eyes carrying the cold weight of a long winter. He looked at Silas, then at Elisette, and his lip curled in a sneer. You bring white boys to sacred ground now, grandfather? He asked, his voice like flint striking steel. The newcomer's name was Tamakwa, and he looked at Silas like he was a disease. Elisette rose slowly, a silent command for peace. He bled for me, Tamakwa. He spoke in English, for Silas's benefit. Tamakwa's gaze flickered to the bloody bandage on Silas's side, but his expression didn't soften. If anything, it hardened. He bleeds white blood. It will poison this place. He was Elisatte's grandson, the old man's only living relative, and his hostility was a wall Silas couldn't see a way around. He set down a pouch of dried meat in a gourd of water, not as a gift, but as a duty fulfilled. He didn't trust Silas. He didn't want him there, and he made sure Silas knew it. Over the next few days, as Silas's body slowly began to heal, a quiet war was waged in the cave. Elisette would teach Silas things: how to grind herbs into a pain-dulling paste, how to read the clouds for rain, how to listen to the silence between the calls of the wild. But whenever Tamakwa was there, the air crackled with tension. He would watch Silas with narrowed eyes, testing him in small ways. He'd leave a bough unstrung just within Silas's reach to see if he'd touch it. He'd ask questions in his own language, trying to catch Silas in a lie he couldn't even understand. Silas wasn't a warrior. He was a survivor. He didn't rise to the challenges. He ignored them. He kept his head down, did the small tasks Elisette assigned him, and tried to make himself as small as the ghost he used to be. This only seemed to infuriate Tamakwa more. He is soft, Tamakwa said to Elisette one evening, thinking Silas was asleep. The town broke him. He has the heart of a mouse. A mouse can survive a winter that kills a wolf, Elisette replied calmly. Do not mistake stillness for weakness. A few days later, Tamakwa announced he was going to scout the town. To see if the fire has cooled, he said, but his eyes were on Silas. It was another test. He was gone for 2 days. When he returned, his face was a thundercloud. He didn't speak to Elisette. He walked straight to Silas. They are telling a new story in Dry Hollow, he said, his voice dripping with venom. A story about the poor ghost boy, brainwashed and kidnapped by a savage war party after he tried to stop them from killing an old man. Silas's blood ran cold. The preacher stands in his church and tells them this, Tamakwa spat. He tells them the boy they scorned is now a tool of the devil and that they must ride out and rescue him. He is turning them into a mob. Thorn wasn't just hiding his crimes. He was building an army to come finish the job. He is using you, Tamakwa snarled, getting right in Silas's face. Your weakness is his strength. You have brought this fire to our door. Before Silas could respond, a signal came from the woods. A perfectly imitated owl hoot, one of the tribe's sentries. Tamakwa stiffened, grabbing his bow. "What is it?" Eluset asked. "Someone is tracking us," Tamakwa hissed. "One man. Moves like a shadow." The assassin. The man with the black fletched arrows. He had followed them. Tamakwa melted into the trees, a predator in his own element. Silas, his heart pounding, scrambled to the mouth of the cave. He felt useless, a burden. Tamakwa was right. He was trouble. He watched the forest, his eyes straining. He saw a flicker of movement. Tamakwa circling around. Then he saw another shadow, moving with an unnatural speed and silence. The assassin. He was closing in on Tamakwa's position from the side. A perfect ambush. Tamakwa didn't see him. Silas had no weapon. He had no strength. But he had 19 years of watching. 19 years of knowing how people in Dry Hollow thought, how they moved, how they built things. He knew their shortcuts and their weaknesses. He looked up at the rock face above where the assassin was moving. A section of loose scree, held in place by a dead, rotten log. It was 100-to-1 shot. He grabbed a stone, the biggest one he could lift with his good arm. He didn't shout a warning. That would give them both away. He just threw. The stone sailed through the air, clumsy and wobbling, and struck the rotten log with a dull thud. It was just enough. The log cracked, splintered, and gave way. The entire section of loose rock and dirt cascaded down the cliffside. It wasn't a mighty avalanche, but it was loud and sudden. The assassin was forced to leap back, his cover blown, his ambush ruined. From the trees, Tamakwa saw his chance. An arrow flew from his bow, silent and deadly. It didn't hit the assassin. The man was impossibly fast, diving behind a boulder. But it was close enough to send a message. The shadow hesitated for a moment, then retreated, vanishing back into the wilderness. Silence returned to the forest. Tamakwa emerged from the trees, his face unreadable. He walked back to the cave, stopping in front of Silas. He looked at Silas's trembling hands, at the sweat on his brow. He looked at the place where the rock slide had fallen. He had been seconds from walking into a fatal trap. He knew it. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. He simply pulled a heavy flint knife with a bone handle from his belt and held it out to Silas. "For protection," he said, his voice gruff. Silas took it. The handle was carved with a spiral, the mark of the red elk. It was more than a weapon. It was an acknowledgement. "You fight like a spider, not a wolf," Tamakwa said, a strange hint of respect in his tone. "But even wolves get caught in a spider's web." That night, as Silas held the knife, he spent hours carefully scratching something into the other side of the bone handle with a sharp piece of rock. It was a crude drawing, but clear enough. An elk leaping over a river. Two worlds, one path. The shift was small, but it was real. The air in the cave was still tense, but it was no longer hostile. A fragile thread of understanding had been spun between them, but it wouldn't be enough. Preacher Thorn was still out there, twisting the truth, stoking the flames of hatred. And Silas knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that the fire was coming for them all. The arrival of Chief Nowell felt like the whole mountain holding its breath. He didn't come alone. He brought 50 warriors with him, their faces painted, their silence a weapon in itself. They moved like a storm rolling in, inevitable and powerful. They surrounded the clearing by the cave, their eyes missing nothing. Chief Nowell was a man carved from granite and authority. He was younger than Eluset, but carried twice the weight. He dismounted and walked to the fire circle where Eluset, Tamakwa, and Silas stood waiting. His gaze passed over Eluset with respect, Tamakwa with affection, and then it landed on Silas. It was like being weighed and measured by a god. "This is the boy?" Noel's voice was deep, resonant. "He is," Eluset answered. "The one you say carries the blood of Lele? The one who bled for you?" "He bled instead of me," Eluset corrected gently. The distinction was important. It wasn't just a wound. It was a choice, a sacrifice. Noel stepped closer to Silas, circling him slowly. "Do you know what it means to stand here, on this ground, a white boy with our enemies gathering at your back?" Silas swallowed the fear in his throat. "I know what it meant not to," he said, his voice quiet but steady. Nowell's eyes narrowed. From the circle of warriors, a voice rose, angry and sharp. He's a white dog, a ghost. Let him go back to his own kind before he betrays us. He'll sell us out for a loaf of bread just like the others, another shouted. Tamaqua stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife. He saved my life, he said, his voice cutting through the dissent. He took the arrow meant for my grandfather. His eyes may be white, but his actions were red elk. That cannot be changed, the first warrior yelled. No, Eliseth said, his voice rising, carrying a surprising strength. But he did what some of us have forgotten. He chose to shield instead of strike. And he did it with nothing to gain. Chief Nowell raised a single hand, and the circle fell silent. All eyes turned back to Silas. Let him speak, the chief commanded. This was it. His whole life, or what was left of it, came down to this moment. I'm not here to ask for anything, Silas began, his voice shaking slightly before finding its strength. I don't want a place. I don't want forgiveness. I know what I am. I know what you see when you look at me. He met the eyes of the warriors, one by one. Suspicion, hate, indifference. But I bled for him because no one else would. Because I have spent 19 years being nothing to anyone. And in that one moment, standing in front of that arrow, I was something. I was a shield. He took a deep breath. I'm not the one who shot the arrow. I'm the one who chose to stop it. You don't have to take me in. You don't have to trust me, but I won't run. Not anymore. The silence that followed was absolute. It stretched for an eternity. Finally, Chief Nowell walked right up to him, close enough for Silas to see the flecks of gray in his dark eyes. Would you bleed again? The chief asked, his voice low. Silas met his gaze without flinching. If it meant someone else didn't have to? Yes. Nowell held his gaze for a long moment, searching for the lie, for the weakness. Finding none, he nodded slowly. He unslung a magnificent spear from his back, its tip sharpened obsidian, and drove it hard into the earth at Silas's feet. The thud echoed through the clearing. I do not give trust easily, the chief declared, his voice ringing out for all to hear. But I know the shape of truth, and your truth is sharp. He stepped back. One by one, the warriors began to move. They came forward, some still reluctant, some with a newfound respect, and each one placed something at the foot of the spear. A single hawk feather, a strip of colored leather, a smooth river stone, small tokens, symbols of acceptance, an arsenal of peace. Tamaqua came last. He took off the heavy wolf pelt cloak he wore and wrapped it around Silas's shoulders. You're colder than you let on, he said softly. It was the closest he'd ever come to an apology. That night, Silas was brought before Eliseth and Chief Nowell, deep inside the sacred cave. The fire cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, making the ancient carvings seem to move. It is time for the whole story, Eliseth said, his voice heavy. You did not just bleed for a stranger, Silas. You bled for your own history. He revealed the truth, a truth far darker than Silas could have imagined. His mother, Lele, hadn't just run away. She had discovered Preacher Thorn's great sin. He wasn't just a land grabber. He was a master manipulator. For years, he'd been working for a railroad company, secretly using his position to cheat the Red Elk out of their ancestral lands with forged treaties and false promises. He was a snake in shepherd's clothing. Silas's father, the trapper, had been helping Lele gather proof. They were going to expose him. Thorn couldn't let that happen, Nowell continued, his voice a low growl. He hired mercenaries, the same kind of men who attacked your grandfather, to silence them. They murdered your parents in cold blood. But why keep me alive? Silas asked, his mind reeling. Leverage, Eliseth said, the word like a curse. He kept you alive as a secret weapon, a ghost he could use. If the tribe ever discovered the truth about the treaties, he planned to reveal you, the half-blood son, and create a crisis of succession, a civil war that would tear the tribe apart from the inside while he stole the last of our land. He kept you broken and ashamed, so you would be easy to control. The attack on Eliseth in town wasn't just to silence him, it was the first move in Thorn's endgame. He knew Eliseth was close to finding Silas. Thorn needed chaos. He needed a war. The arrow, Silas whispered, the memory hitting him like a physical blow. The black-fletched arrow. It wasn't from the town. No, Tamakwa said, stepping out of the shadows. He held an identical arrow in his hand. We found the assassin's camp. This is the mark of a man named Corbin, the same man who attacked your grandfather. He wasn't just a drunken miner. He was Thorne's hired killer. The world snapped into sharp, brutal focus. Jed and Corbin weren't random thugs. They were Thorne's lieutenants. The shove and the bottle were a public performance designed to provoke a reaction. When that didn't work, Corbin switched to the real plan. Assassination. He was meant to kill Elisette, frame the town for it, and use the ensuing chaos to start a war. Silas hadn't just gotten in the way of a random arrow. He had single-handedly ruined a conspiracy 20 years in the making. The morning of the naming came with a silver mist that clung to the trees like a shroud. Silas stood on a bluff overlooking the canyon, the wolf pelt cloak heavy on his shoulders. He was no longer Silas Boone, the ghost boy. That person had died in the fire, bled out on the trail, and been buried by the truth. But he didn't yet know who he was in his place. Tamakwa came and stood beside him. He held out a new tunic, stitched from the softest deerskin, beaded with the symbol of the red elk. For after, Tamakwa said, when you walk forward, it should be as the man you became, not the boy they left behind. I don't know who that man is, Silas admitted, his voice raw. That's the point of the name, Tamakwa said, a rare small smile touching his lips. It tells you. At the fire circle, the entire tribe was gathered. Elusette, dressed in ceremonial robes, stood at the center. He placed a hand on Silas's shoulder, his touch surprisingly strong. You walked in silence, the old man began, his voice echoing in the quiet clearing. You bled in stillness. You gave without name or debt. You have earned the right to carry one. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to Silas's. You shall be called Atakoki, he declared, the quiet fire. For your spirit does not roar for attention, but it warms those who gather near, and when needed, it burns. Atakoki, quiet fire. It fit like his own skin. Chief Nowell raised his spear and shouted the name to the sky. Atakoki! And the tribe, 100 voices as one, roared it back. Atakoki! The celebration was solemn and joyful. A peace had been won. A lost son had been found. But as night began to fall, a scout came sprinting into the camp, breathless, a bloody gash on his arm. Riders, he gasped, from the town. Thorne leads them, and they have a wagon. Atakoki's heart dropped. He knew what a wagon meant. It wasn't for supplies. They're not just coming for a fight, he said, his voice grim. They're coming to finish it. He looked at Chief Noel. They want me. This is my fight. Tamakwa put a hand on his shoulder. They will have to go through all of us, he said, his voice iron. You are one of us now. No, Atakoki said, a new cold clarity filling him. They come for Silas Boone. They'll only see a traitor white boy. Let them. He turned to Noel. But they are coming for your land. Let me use the ghost they created against them. They waited at the narrow bend in the canyon path, the place where the forest became a natural choke point. The warriors were hidden in the rocks and trees above, silent as spirits. Atakoki stood alone in the middle of the path, armed with the bow Tamakwa had given him and a quiver of arrows. He looked small and alone. He was the bait. Thorne rode in at the head of 20 armed men. They were not a drunken mob this time. They were organized, their faces grim and determined, and behind them, trundling on iron wheels, was the wagon. Just as he'd feared, it held a Gatling gun, its brass barrel gleaming menacingly in the fading light. Thorne was planning a massacre. He saw Atakoki and a cruel, triumphant smile spread across his face. Well, well, the prodigal son returns to the slaughter. Did your new family send you out to beg for them, boy? I'm not here to beg, Thorne, Atakoki said, his voice steady, carrying in the still air. I'm here to give you a choice. Thorne laughed, a loud, ugly sound. A choice? I have an army and a Gatling gun. You have a stick and some string. I don't think you're in a position to be offering choices. You can turn around, Atakoki said, ignoring the taunt. You can leave this land and never return. You tell the town the boy they tormented for 20 years is finally gone, and you live with your sins. Or, Thorn prompted, enjoying the game, or I show everyone the man you really are. Thorn's smile vanished. You have nothing. I have the truth. Atakoki shot back. He reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a bundle of papers. The original fraudulent treaties his parents had died to protect, recovered by Elisette from their old hidden homestead. I have proof of every acre you've stolen, every lie you've told, every life you've destroyed, including my parents. The men behind Thorn shifted uneasily. They had come to fight savages, not to die for a land thief and a murderer. Thorn's face turned purple with rage. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The boy was supposed to be broken. You should have stayed a ghost, he screamed, his composure shattering. He raised his own rifle. Kill him! Kill them all! He fired, but Atakoki was already moving. He dove behind a rock as the first bullet sparked against the stone. That was the signal. From the cliffs above, a single arrow flew. Tamakwa's arrow. It didn't fly at Thorn or any of his men. It struck the ammunition box next to the Gatling gun. The arrowhead was wrapped in oil-soaked pitch, and it was burning. The box exploded. The blast threw men from their horses. Chaos erupted. Before they could recover, a volley of 50 arrows rained down, not to kill, but to pin. They thudded into the ground around the townsmen, creating a cage of wood and feathers. The warriors of the Red Elk appeared on the ridges, their numbers suddenly seeming to triple in the twilight. They didn't shout war cries. They just stood there, a silent, deadly promise. The townsmen panicked. They had been led into a trap. This wasn't a righteous crusade. It was a hornet's nest. They turned their horses, fleeing back the way they came, abandoning their leader in his mad quest. Thorn was left alone, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. He stared at Atakoki, who now stood before him, bow drawn, arrow aimed at his heart. It's over, Thorn, Atakoki said. Desperate, mad, Thorn lunged, not at Atakoki, but at Tamakwa, who had dropped down from the ridge behind him. Thorn pulled a knife, a last, pathetic attempt to take someone with him. Tamakwa sidestepped the clumsy attack, grabbing Thorn's arm and twisting. They struggled for a moment at the very edge of the canyon path. Thorn, consumed by his own hate, lost his footing. He teetered on the edge for a heartbeat, his eyes wide with the terror he had inflicted on so many others. Then, with a scream that was swallowed by the vast emptiness of the canyon, he fell. Silence. The war was over. Justice, sharp and final, had been served. In the days that followed, a new peace settled between the town and the tribe. The truth carried back by the humbled men had a way of clearing the air. They had been led by a monster and saved by the boy they had called a ghost. Atakoki, the quiet fire, had found his people. He had found his brother in Tamakwa. He had found his home. One evening, he and Elusess sat at the edge of the canyon, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors. I used to dream of having a home, Atakoki said, his voice full of a peace he'd never known. Elusset nodded, his ancient eyes reflecting the sky. And now? Now, Atakoki said, a small smile on his face. Now I dream of the path forward. That, the old man said, placing a hand on his shoulder, is the better dream. Sometimes the world tries to tell you who you are. It gives you a name you didn't ask for and a story you didn't write. It tries to make you small, invisible, a ghost in your own life. But even a ghost can learn to fight back. You don't have to roar to be heard. You just have to be willing to stand, to become a shield for someone else. You just have to find your own quiet fire. And when you do, the world has no choice but to learn your true name. If you enjoyed this story of justice and finding where you belong, do me a favor and incinerate that subscribe button. And let me know in the comments. What's a moment that made you feel like you finally found your own tribe? Thanks for watching.